Hello, everyone. This is Michael Justin Lee, the president of the Ivy Dream. Welcome to another episode of Aspire, our podcast channel in which we talk with current students and recent graduates of the most elite academic programs. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Jasper Burns. He's a Stanford Law student and Knight-Hennessy Scholar. He served 8 years in the U.S. Navy, flying EA-18G Growlers, deploying across the USS Carl Vinson, and later supporting the intelligence community in D.C. He has also served as a White House Social Aide and concluded his Navy career as a military fellow at McKinsey Company. Welcome, Jasper.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
It's our pleasure and honor. Jasper, let's start our discussion with your academic journey from about high school. Can you tell us what you were anticipating doing at that time?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I was kind of on an entirely different path. I was looking to be a product designer or industrial designer, and I was looking at kind of art and design schools. I was taking art classes on the weekend, and ended up pivoting a couple times by the time I ended up where I am now.
Yes, what did you specifically? You mentioned that you intended to be a designer. Where did you go to university?
So I ended up pivoting by the time I decided on which college to go to into rather than kind of building products, I decided I was going to build tech. And I ended up at Boston University studying computer science and economics. And the goal there was to join the kind of the Silicon Valley tech industry, 10 years ago, which now I'm in Silicon Valley now, but um, that that was a long journey to get here. So.
But you mentioned that you had another career path change. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, so I went from the art and design stuff, then I went to looking to do tech, and then during my freshman year at Boston University, we had the Boston bombing, and I had spent the day at the 25-mile marker. And pre-COVID, we ended up having the whole city locked down for a whole week during the manhunt. And it was pretty much the first time that I was a spectator to, or involved in, or witness to this like historical moment. And that's not something I had felt before. And that kind of sense of scale and meaning, along with a number of other factors that were happening in my personal life, ended up pushing me to join the military or join ROTC, which is something that was never really on my plate before college, but that was definitely a major pivot point in my life.
Jasper, what year were you in when you made that decision to enter ROTC?
Sure. So I was a normal college student my freshman year, just doing CS and econ and on that entrepreneurship track when the Boston bombing happened. And so it wasn't until that summer that I started signing some paperwork, and then my sophomore year when I started in ROTC.
And when you made that decision, did you intend to be active duty upon graduation?
Yes, that was definitely a central thing I was deciding on while I was trying to pick if I was going Army, Air Force, or Navy. One of the reasons I chose Navy was because even in peacetime, I'd be able to go active duty and I'd be able to deploy. I had a lot of fear about joining one of the services and not actually doing anything, and so that was definitely a central decision point for me.
So you clearly had, beyond an interest, you had a fascination with military service. Were you thinking longer term already beyond what you would do after your military service had ended?
No, at this, so I ended up signing an aviation contract my senior year, which itself is a much longer contract. So I was going to be in the Navy for at least 8 years. I kind of recognized that it's too hard to plan that far ahead, and so I don't even know if I anticipated going to grad school at that point. I think I was just living the moment and just trying to have an interesting and fulfilling life. And I tend to think fairly far ahead, but I was thinking far ahead in military career at the time. Like I was looking at programs to do as a more senior military officer than I was looking at things outside.
Fascinating. You mentioned that you signed a flight service contract.
Yeah,
So you knew you wanted to be an aviator.
Yeah, that's right. So, I had some bad eyesight at the time. I've had my eyes fixed since, but I ended up wanting to do aviation, and so I was able to get a backseat contract, which I ended up, going through flight school in Florida and picking up fighter jets, which I got to do for a couple of years, which was a kind of an awesome experience. So.
Surely is a frivolous question. How close is the Top Gun experience in real life?
Oh, well, the new movie, the Top Gun Maverick was definitely filmed by real aviators. I had one of my instructors was flew for the movie, the final mission of the movie, and they definitely were being advised by people in our world. We have a lot of experience with some stories with Miles Teller and Tom Cruise that I won't share here, but not my personal experiences, but those of my friends. So they were it was pretty accurate. I think it was a lot more accurate than the first movie. I was pretty happy with it. Of course, there's definite yeah, there's definite differences that are highly unrealistic, but based off of what you'd expect from Hollywood, I think we were all pretty happy with the movie.
Wonderful. Jasper, you are now at Stanford. So at some point, your thinking did extend beyond a military career. At what point in your life did that start?
Yeah, so I ended up deploying to the South China Sea on an aircraft carrier during part of my service. And this was kind of at the same time as COVID. And I think there was a lot of frustration at that time with the military and how, um, some of our leadership was treating these issues. And, as I look back at my military service now, I think of it extremely highly. I had some really wonderful, fascinating experiences, but I think at some point you kind of wanted a little more autonomy and agency in your life. And so that probably happened at my fifth or sixth year in. And at some point you start thinking, what could be on the outside. And yeah. So by the time I was in flight school for 2 years. I did 4 years with the actual squadrons. And then I moved to DC for a shore tour. We call it in the Navy, we call it a shore tour because you're on shore instead of at sea, and moved to Washington D.C. And that's kind of where I started the pivot transition for my life.
Yes, based on what we know of your resume, you worked for McKinsey in some capacity. Could you tell us about that, please?
Oh yeah, so I'll give you the whole DC spiel. So I ended up finishing my aviation contract, or sorry, finishing my aviation tour. I was still an aviator when I moved to DC. I did some work doing aviation support to the intelligence community, and then did some work at the White House as a social aide on the side. And then yes, I went to McKinsey and Company as a military fellow. So the Navy offers a transition fellowship called SkillBridge, where they try to help veterans who are getting out get some experience in the private sector world. And this seemed like one of the best opportunities for me to learn a lot very quickly. And so I had to do kind of your standard case interview process with a couple associates and then with a couple partners. Got the offer and was able to work with them for a couple months as part of this transition program.
That sounds like a wonderful program. And what's that contributive to your decision to go to law school?
So I had already applied to law school by the time I was doing the case interviews with McKinsey. So I'd already decided to go to law school in many respects. I suppose if my time at McKinsey was um, particularly amazing, they gave me a return offer and I could have stayed with them and either deferred or just decided not to go to law school. But it in itself was not a determinative factor. It was kind of just another way for me to learn a little bit more before I transitioned fully.
When did you start preparing for the LSAT, and how were you able to find the time to do so, being both active duty and employee at McKinsey?
Okay, so yeah, we got to make sure the timeline's clear here. I was not studying for the LSAT while I was at McKinsey. That would have been much too hard. I was for the year and a half before then, while I was in DC, I was able to do a about an hour a morning before I went to work. And then when I would get home, I would do an hour at night. And then on the weekends, I would do one or two practice tests. And so I started doing that in June of 2022 in order to apply pretty much when applications opened September-ish of 2023. So I took a diagnostic. My goal was to get above the 75th percentile at the target schools I had. And so I just kind of kept grinding until I got there. And I think I looked at my documentation before this podcast, and I think I took about 40 practice tests total. So I was really working hard trying to get my score where I wanted it, and ultimately did.
That's pretty impressive. 40 practice exams. May I ask, what prep materials did you find useful?
Yeah, so I started with, just looking at some of the most popular prep books, et cetera, on Amazon or wherever else. So I started with the LSAT trainer, which was by Mike Kim. But I quickly found that I didn't really like studying out of the books, and when I recommend to other people to do LSAT studying, I really think the online programs are the best for just the rapidity at which you can improve because you can do a question, you can, if you get it wrong, you can see what the right answer is, you can watch a video explaining how you could have done it better, and then you can internalize that point and move on really quickly, where that's a lot harder with the written materials. So I ended up using the LSAT daemon. I know a lot of people had similar success with Seven Sage. I'm sure there's a dozen other programs out there, but I really think the quick learn, internalize, move on that you're able to do, and the tracking, the data tracking you can do with some of these online programs is the way to go.
I think our audience would find what you just said extremely useful indeed. How long did you keep up this study regimen?
Yeah, so my diagnostic was pretty good, but I still needed like 10 to 12 point improvement to be above the 75th percentile at the top schools. So by the way, the reason I was trying to do that was because I had a below 75th percentile GPA at 3.7, which is respectable, but these top schools now, really have high standards. So to me, this was a no-fail mission. That's why I kind of wanted those crazy scores. And it took me about a year to get that on record. It took me about 6 months to get the practice tests where I needed them, but sometimes it takes a couple rolls of the dice to get what you need on the official one. So yeah, about a year.
That was tough. That sounds like a tough year, but I'm not surprised that with your military discipline, you got there. So, congratulations for that. Jasper, now let's talk about the application process for law school. We can assume that you applied to all the top ones. How did you settle upon Stanford at the end?
Yeah, this was actually a really tough decision for me because I did have options, and I I almost wasn't ready to go to Stanford, but I ended up I ended up deciding, I was kind of more of an East Coast guy. I'm, a little bit more of that kind of raw aggression or intensity. And Stanford and California have this kind of cool about them. And ultimately, there was a couple factors. One is I decided for some of these top schools on the East Coast, I might fit in better there. But I really realized that I would probably grow more at Stanford. It offered me more opportunity to develop as a human being, and so that was an important one. And then, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I also was offered the Knight-Hennessy Scholarship here as well, and I didn't need the money, so it's a full ride here at Stanford. And I didn't actually need the money because I had a full ride from the GI Bill. So that wasn't actually, the money wasn't a decision point, but the community and the opportunity it offered was particularly interesting and was going to be another layer of development for me as I tried to transition careers. And that's something that just was not on offer at some of these other schools.
Indeed, I definitely wanted to talk about the Knight Hennessy after talking about application experience, but since we've brought it up already, let's talk about it now. So our audience knows, could you please tell them what is the Knight Hennessy?
So Knight-Hennessy Scholars is this merit-based full ride multidisciplinary and multicultural global leadership program. That's a lot of words, but Basically there's seven graduate schools at Stanford, and they take a couple people from each of these schools, a couple MBAs, a couple lawyers, a couple doctors, a couple engineers, etc. And they have a lot of programming for us together, and they're trying to, they're trying to build world leaders in a couple different domains. This is not how they frame it, but I kind of imagine that they're trying to put people on the cover of magazines, right? The person who cures cancer, the person who builds the next billion-dollar business, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really interesting program that it's only about 7 or 8 years old right now, but it's very well funded, very well programmed. The staff is amazing, and yeah, they're trying to make sure that we are able to tell good narrative stories about the impact we're trying to make in the world.
And you certainly told a very good story. Jasper, how did you approach your application essays for law school as well as for the Knight-Hennessy?
Sure. So I think they're fairly similar, insofar as you're trying to show that you are a deep and interesting person, but also have a breadth of personality. So I, and especially at Stanford, I think they really want multidimensional people. So I ended up, using the central parts of my application components to tell my, to try and show my depth on the topics that I was interested in, and then some of the supplementary application materials to try and show a little bit of breadth. I've heard the term T-shaped people before, like the letter T, where you have a spike in some domain, but you still have some, at the top of the T, the crossbar of the T, you still have interest across more domains than just where the spike is. And so I think that's a pretty interesting thing to think about. Like, for example, one of my good friends here is a private equity guy, but he's not just a private equity guy. He's a fisherman and a surfer, and he has a lot more outdoor vibes than just being locked behind a cubicle for the last decade. So I think being a complex, multidimensional human is a good way to approach these applications.
Oh, that's interesting. So you approached it with discussing your depth and breadth.
Yeah. So for me, my resume would say, "Oh, look, here's a military fighter jet guy. He must be super intense and very military." But it's frankly, no, that's not fully depict. It doesn't fully depict my entire personality. My whole family is very much in the art world and somewhat bohemian, and I was able to lean on uh, kind of unexpected, or as Knight Hennessy likes to call, improbable aspects of my background, and show that I'm much more than just a aggressive military guy or something. And so I think that was a really useful framing to come into these applications.
That's very interesting information for our audience. Did you do that depth and breadth approach for all your law school applications?
Well, I guess it sort of depends what question they're asking. I think a mistake people often make is not answering the question that is being asked. So you said something I had in the back of my mind, but I wouldn't necessarily try and force it if it's not appropriate to the question being asked. One of the other things I'd recommend when you're trying to describe your purpose statements here are to try and show distance traveled. I know that's something that we care about here at Stanford. So not just what are you interested in, but how did you get here? How did you get interested in it? Where were you? And kind of describing some of the pivot points. So that's something I did in my essays, right? I was able to draw this narrative arc about how I was looking in art and design, as we talked about, pivoting into tech, and then the Boston bombing and why I pivoted into public service, and now why I pivot out. And even some of these pivot points might be a single sentence, but just being able to draw this narrative story arc about how, not just what you care about, but why you care about it and what brought you to this point, is important. So I think that's another method besides just focusing on depth and breadth. That's probably a pretty useful tool as people try to craft their applications.
That's wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. One thing that's unusual about the Knight Hennessy application is that they ask about improbable facts about the applicant, eight in particular. Jasper, I won't ask you specifically what your eight were, but how did you approach answering that particular question?
Sure, sure. So I first of all, I want to say that I'm not any bit associated with the admissions team, so I don't know how they approach it. So this is all just kind of personal vibes from me before I ever got to the program. Um, but one of the things I was, yeah, this would be that kind of T-shaped person approach that I was thinking about, where I I wanted to show that I was had a spike in a certain domain, so I was leaning in to aviation and tech and these type of topics. But I also wanted to show that I was more than just that. So they asked for eight improbable facts, and I probably spent about four of them on things that kind of emphasized my resume, and then I spent but were also improbable because they want them to be interesting. And then the other four, or I might have even biased a little bit broader, so maybe it was three and five. But regardless, the other ones I would spend on doing things that were really, really improbable. Things like some of the art stuff that you wouldn't expect from a military person like me, or some other hobbies that just wouldn't be expected. So they, I think they really do want some things that are improbable, that are unusual, and show that you have broad interest. So.
I understand that you are not part of the admissions process, of course. What, do you sense, though, that the Knight-Hennessy grantors were looking for achievement as well as improbability in what they wrote?
I think, well, I think it's good to look at the mission of the program, what they state on their website, and the cohort they're trying to build. So they're not necessarily just looking for an individual, they're looking to build a cohort of individuals. And so it's part of it is, what can you offer your fellow students that is unusual or different than what other people are offering, right? And so, improbability is in itself a virtue. It's just something that makes for more interesting people. And so, I would think about how you craft your space in a wider cohort. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be spiky in certain domains, and they can imagine you, solving some world issue, making some grand impact, uh, as well as offering and being able to connect with people in different domains and from different cultures.
That is very interesting advice to consider one's application um, towards being a member of a cohort. I don't think any of our previous guests had actually phrased it quite that way before. So thank you for putting it in that context. Wonderful.
But you might even want to consider that for the normal law school as well, right? All these admissions committees want students that teach that. I mean, I don't want to speak for them because I've not been part of any of them, but the way I imagine it is that they want students who will be able to expose other students to things. And so, yeah, I mean, I would probably go broader than even just Knight Hennessy, and just a general principle.
Mm. Even further wonderful advice then. Thank you so much, Jasper. In your application, how did you select your recommenders?
So I think military applicants probably have a little bit of a leg up here because the our leadership that we work with, we know very well, right? So I ended up having four recommenders. I had two from my squadron, and these were, a department head, so I want someone who's my direct boss, as well as my commanding officer, who's my boss's boss. Uh, but they were also people I worked with and I flew with, right? I would be in the same cockpit as them because we had two-seat cockpits, and so we were also very close as humans, despite the kind of hierarchical differences. So those were two of my recommenders. They were able to share what stories they wanted to tell, so that I could also craft the rest of my application to complement it. And that's a useful thing to think about. Your recommenders should be writing the essays, but it might be nice to know what they're writing about so that you can complement those stories to give a broader application. Then I had another recommender who was from my work in the Intel community. And then I was very fortunate being 8 years out of undergrad that about a year prior, I had had a professor reach out to me cold, 7 years later. And that was someone who had remembered me and was interested in what I was doing. And so I was lucky because it's really hard for some of us older students to get professor recommendations when we'd been out of school for so long. So I was able to get one professor rec as well. So, and then not all the schools want four. So I was kind of picking and choosing based off of what I thought those individual schools would want. But it's my squadron recommendations were probably my strongest ones because they knew me the best. And then I know a lot of these schools wanted the academic rec. So definitely included the professor one as well.
Mm, very fortunate that your former professor reached out to you. That's wonderful. Jasper, did you find yourself preparing a lot for the interview portions of your application, Knight-Hennessy as well as the schools?
Yeah, so I didn't really do any mock interviews with friends or anything, though I'm sure that's valuable for some people. I'm pretty talkative and open with some of these things, but I definitely prepped answers to some of the expected questions. There's things that are inevitable. Why law? Why now? Some questions about the background on your resume. Why our school? Stuff like that that I think are no-brainers to have some sort of pre-drafted bullet points. You don't want to script things, otherwise you'll sound scripted. But um, I basically looked at every question I could find online. I threw up a couple bullet points for each of them just so I had thought through them at least once prior, and then just tried to be cordial and happy on these interviews, which uh, generally worked out. So.
Well, congratulations on all that. It obviously went very well. And now you're at Stanford. Please, Jasper, tell us what is life academically and socially as you found it at Stanford Law?
Yeah, so Stanford is one of the smallest schools, especially of these top schools. So I think it's only about 180 to 185 JD's applicants here. We have six sections of 30 students. And so, and we can't get bigger than that really because our classrooms are about 30 or 60-ish people. So they're kind of built around our sections. And what's nice is because we have a smaller section, you do know everyone in your section, right? So your first quarter of law school, you have one or two classes that are your section only, so just those 30 people. And then you have a couple classes that are double section, where it's your section plus another one, so you get to meet another group. And by the time you finish your 1L year, their goal is to rotate the sections that you're paired with. So by the time you finish 1L, you've had class with all of your classmates, which I think is a pretty interesting and good system. And because we're only about 180 people, that's enough people to have met everyone, and you might not completely remember everyone's name or know a total amount of details about them, but it's a good way to meet people. So I'm glad we have the system we do.
Yes, that does seem like a wonderful pedagogy. Jasper, you're finishing up, actually, you're starting up your second semester of 1L. Have you any specific career direction you're looking towards right now?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reckoning one does when you're transitioning as, I'm 31 now, so I'm a lot older than most of these other students. And so there's a little bit of decision making that's going to be different for me than it will be for some of your listeners or some of my classmates. I am, well, I absolutely love a lot of the law we're learning. The actual topic areas are fascinating. I like my classes. I I'm definitely exploring different opportunities, both in law and in business, and potentially in policy and government again. So I have hypotheses about where I'd want to send my future, but I haven't really anchored down on complete answers yet.
Jasper, let's project forward some decades. What would you say would be your definition of success towards the end of your career?
Okay, big questions, eh? All right, so there's a quote that I love, which I kind of consider a guiding principle in some sorts, from E.B. White, who I think is the author of Stuart Little or Charlotte's Web. Um, yeah, okay, good. He's got a quote that goes something along the lines of, "I wake up every morning torn between the desire to save the world and to savor it, and it makes it very hard to plan the day." And this kind of save the world and savor it dichotomy is very much how I think about my career. Um, I want to save the world. So I want to make an impact. I want to do things at scale that influence other people, that help, my fellow countrymen and those of the world and, the people I care about. But I also want to savor the world, right? I want to enjoy it. I want to build enough financial stability that I can do the types of things that I want to do in my own life and raise a family and the rest of it. So, you know, success is going to have some kind of combination of those two things. And kind of another aspect to fold in there is, and this has been something that's been true to me for a decade now, is really wanting to like project myself onto my deathbed and look back and make sure that I didn't have any regrets. And I want to live as many lifetimes in one as I can, which is, you know, part of the reason I did aviation for a couple of years. That was its own experience. I was able to go to the intelligence community and work at the White House. Those were their own experiences. Now, law school is its own field. And I really hope, if we were to project forward and then look back, that I have a lot of chapters of my life rather than one 40-year career as a corporate attorney or something. It uh, uh, just I'm definitely more of a breadth guy in terms of what I'm looking for, in terms of defining success.
What a wonderful answer. What a wonderful answer. And what a wonderful interview overall. I say without exaggeration, Jasper, that our talk with you is one of the most fascinating of all that we've conducted on this channel. And I really mean that. So I'd like to thank you so very, very much for the time you've given us, for all the advice you've given our audience. And we would like to wish you the very best. And I'd like to offer you this too, Jasper. At your interest, please come back on our channel. Let us know, and we can continue this wonderful discussion to cover the path you've continued to walk. I know our audience would greatly benefit from that.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I would love to do that in a couple of years. Hopefully, I'll have some more parts of my future solidified and a little more wisdom to share if that's the case. So, thank you so much.
The pleasure is genuinely and truly ours. To our audience, we have just been in discussion with Jasper Burns, a first year student at Stanford Law, and I know that you've gotten a lot out of this to our audience. Thank you, Jasper. We wish you the very, very best from all of us here at the Ivy Dream.
All right, you have a good one, Michael. Thank you.